Hello and welcome. My name is Jess and you're listening to Legaltini, your very own sip of law school. The goal of this podcast is to give you just a taste of what it's like going to law school. Whether you're already in school, considering it, have a loved one currently experiencing the fun that is law school, or you just want to follow my journey, I'm so glad you're here.
You can also follow me on Instagram at legaltini_podcast and check out my website legaltini.com. And if you enjoy the podcast, don't forget to rate and review below.
Grab your Legaltini and let's take a sip.
Hello. Welcome back to Legaltini. I am so excited. This is the third and final episode of this series. So this big law series on what even is big law, how to get a job in big law, and what to do once you get the job, and how to really make an impression and do a really great job. So this is the third episode. If you've missed the first two, go back and listen to those. I mean, this will still be helpful, but it will just kind of help to have the whole picture before going in. So this is the stage where you have landed a summer internship at a law firm. The hardest step is now behind you, which is fabulous. And honestly, simply getting your foot in the door at a firm is one of the hardest achievements. So congratulations. If that's your case, if you're still looking and you're still interviewing, you've got this. Go back to my interviewing podcast, go back to how to get the job. That will all be super helpful. But this is really good information for once you get the job, once you're in the door, how to make a lasting impression. So by this point, you have likely spent countless hours crafting cover letters, a killer resume, you're researching firms, you're attending interviews. Once you finally get the job, you have your work cut out for you, but they already want you there. And that much can also even be said about interviewing. When you show up to an interview, that means that they selected your information, your person, right? Like they selected you and they said, yeah, this is a person that we want here. So take a little bit of the stress off. Honestly, I mean, once you're in the door, that means that they see something in you and they're not stupid, right? They're not blindly hiring people. I mean, you are being chosen and selected out of many applicants. So if you've landed a job at a firm, that's a big deal. And you can take a little bit of the load off knowing that they want you there. So the biggest goal of this summer is to make a great impression and to get a return offer for the next summer or for after graduation if you're a rising 3L, of course. So what kind of an impression are we talking about? Well, I guess that's up to you. Obviously, everybody has their own idea of what a good impression is, but let me give you my perspective to see if that helps you to narrow it down. I'm going to share with you some things that every firm is looking for, some things that most firms are looking for, and then something that absolutely no firm is looking for. And as we go along, I'll break that down, how to get those qualities across to someone that you have a limited amount of time and opportunities to really showcase yourself. So by the end of this podcast, you should have an idea of what to do once you get to the firm to portray yourself in exactly the way that you want to. And really just to show off the best version of yourself in any scenario. All right, so to break this down into chunks for you, first I'm going to talk about the 3 things that firms are and are not looking for in summer associates. Then I'm going to talk about time management, and then I'm going to talk about actually doing the work. So that's the larger 3 chunks, and then within each of those, of course, I've got lots of different things. So first, talking about what firms are looking for. So every firm is looking for someone who generates decent work and pays attention to details. This means that everything you turn in needs to be polished. They don't want drafts of your work. Unless, now, okay, here's a caveat. If you have questions, then that's different, but I still would not email that draft to them. I would go to them in person and ask questions, because then if you're sort of off on what you're doing, you can roll with it a little bit better without them thinking, gosh, what were they doing? So you can kind of dip and dive a little bit more and say, oh yeah, that's what I was doing. Or, you can kind of jive with them a little bit more without just showing them a product. Now, I have gone to a different associate or a different partner. For example, there was a partner that gave me a project and I had not done a project for him yet. And so I brought my questions to a different partner who's kind of a newer one and asked her some questions of, okay, how does this person generally like their work to be done? What is he looking for? What are your tips? And so she gave me, little tips about formatting and what's important to him. And it was helpful when I turned in the final product to be keeping those things in mind. But I recommend making yourself a sort of polish list that can even be unique to specific partners, but just things like double check your headings, check for spelling, check for fonts, check for size, check for formatting, things like that you can just run through quickly before you turn it in. And instead of keeping it all in your mind, it's helpful to have a list that you can check off, and that way you feel solid about turning in your product. So the next thing under generating decent work product and paying attention to details is that this means there should be 0 spelling errors. This includes the body of your email, the assignment, any documents you're turning in. I personally like to print out every assignment before I turn it in, and I'll do a round of editing and revising based on that printout. I catch a lot of really random formatting and editing things this way, and plus there's actually research that says we absorb more of what we read when we read text on paper instead of on a screen, especially when it's over 500 words. So to give you a little example, I turned in an assignment sort of early on at the firm that I worked at this summer, and the attorney needed it that day. I had some other things going on. So, I spent several hours on the assignment, but I also felt like I had to push something out pretty quick. And so, I spent several hours, felt good about the work product. He knew that I'm not a pro at this. He just wanted me to take a stab at it. And it was a cool opportunity to try my hand at something that I had not done ever, in my whole life. So it was a great opportunity. Now, the name of the client, obviously I can't and won't tell you the name of the client, but it had like a mix of some numbers and letters. Basically, it's not normal words we use every day. And so it was a little bit tricky for my potentially dyslexic mind. And y'all, I spelled the client's name wrong. I submitted it. I was feeling good. The next day, he was like, hey, I've got some feedback for you. Super helpful, blah, blah, blah. Everything you did was really great. And he showed me. And honestly, he really took the time to explain and show me his thought process. And he had made revisions to it, but he was like, this was really great. And I loved that you included this. I would have done it this way. Here's just really constructive feedback. Great experience. However, he then said, but you definitely want to spell the client's name right. And when I say that, I think my jaw might have dropped. I was like, oh my gosh, did I spell the client's name wrong? And he's like, yeah. The thing is, when you are an attorney and someone is hiring you, they are hiring you to handle things that they don't know how to do or they don't feel confident doing, but they can definitely spell their own name right. So you're not really setting a great tone or giving them a good impression if you can't get that one thing that they actually can do. If you can't get that right, then, they sort of lose trust in your other work. And I could not believe that I made such a silly mistake, and one that could just have been avoided by double checking the name. I mean, it was just, I don't know if it was that I felt like I was in a rush. I don't know what it was, but y'all, I made this really dumb mistake, and he was so gracious about it. And he said, I made a similar mistake early on. It's okay. And what he told me is that it's great to learn those lessons in an environment where an attorney is checking your work and improving on it before sending it to the client. So I tell you this embarrassing story so that hopefully you can learn from me and not make that mistake. Oof. And when I tell you that I will never make that mistake again, and I didn't the rest of my internship, I triple checked all of the names of the clients because I don't know, once you make that mistake, you don't make it again. So all of that to say, double check your work, 0 spelling errors, including client names. And then the last thing under this is just, I like to print out my final work product and personally hand it to the attorney or the partner for the same reasons that I mentioned earlier, that people like to read hard copies of things and they process it better, and it saves them a step of having to print it out. It's just a little bit nice to kind of be able to wrap it up in a bow. I would always put it in a file folder with the email, like a printout of the email that I sent to them with the assignment on the top of the file folder, so that it sort of packages it up nicely. As soon as they see it, they know exactly what it is. They can set it on their desk. They can get to it later. So that's kind of a really nice way to tie it all up in a bow. So that is what every firm is looking for. They just want someone who generates this decent work product and pays attention to details. So that's easy. I mean, if you're in law school and if you wrote a cover letter and a resume that pass their requirements for decent work product, then it's likely that you're capable of turning in an assignment that is equally as polished. So just look at it that way, that you get one opportunity to make an impression on them and you really want it to be positive. So that's what everyone is looking for. Something that most firms are looking for, and I say this as a most because I haven't worked in every firm, and so I know that there's going to be different cultures, different places, but my impression from basically every attorney at a firm that I have talked to is that they're looking for someone that they want to work with. The things that lead into this are personality, timeliness, dedication to the firm, ease of interactions and just like good vibes, and then just general ability to work well with others. You hear that kind of as a phrase that people use, actually, I think for like kindergarteners, where they're like, they play nicely with others. Or maybe that's for like doggy daycare. I don't know what it is, but you know what I mean, where it's just like a general ease of interaction. They're not difficult. They're not mean. They're not, throwing people under the bus. It's just a nice work environment. So in this area, the key is really in the intangibles. So when people stop by your office to introduce themselves, or when you go to lunch with a partner or a group of people, when you grab a drink with the attorneys, when you, turn in your project and like stop and chat a little bit, or, you meet somebody at the coffee machine, how you interact with them. All of these interactions are opportunities to send specific messages. And everything that you do in life does that. It sends messages. So start to notice your mannerisms and behaviors and kind of consider what the implications are of each behavior. So when you walk up to a cashier and you smile as you're walking up, or when you cross your arms while you're sitting on like public transportation or something, or you have headphones in, when you sigh heavily around someone that you care about, when you clench your jaw, when you avert your eyes, when you shift your body away from someone or towards them, when you nod your head as someone's talking, all of these things are sending messages. And so guess who is in total control of all of those messages? Yes, you guessed it. You're a smart cookie. You can send any kind of a message that you want. And these are really the key intangibles that help you make a lasting impression on the people that you're interacting with. Also, submitting sloppy work or making any kind of a snide remark about anything or anyone should be avoided. If you get caught in an awkward situation where people are gossiping or doing anything that's inappropriate, get out as soon as you can. And if you can't escape, like if you're at lunch or something like that, try to keep turning the conversation back to appropriate or work-related things. And don't be afraid to stand up for someone or something that you believe in, but do it in a polite way. You're not here to burn bridges. You can just avoid the bridge, right? You can just kind of sidestep and keep things generally positive. Changing the subject is always a nice way to sort of avoid further gossip or sidestep a conversation that you're not really comfortable with. You could say something like, well, I'm not really sure about that, but I do know I'm really enjoying working with blank, insert Susie right here, right? And then you can explain a project that you've been working on and ask them for any thoughts about your work, or if they had a project that they really liked working on in their internship. You can sort of divert the conversation. And yeah, it feels weird to do it, but it's not unheard of. And I think that any good people are going to recognize that and move on. So just keep that in mind. It can be uncomfortable, but that situation can come up where you're just not comfortable talking about what everyone else is talking about. And that happens in life. I mean, that happens at friends' dinners. That happens in law school. That happens everywhere. So just keep in mind that you can help to steer the conversation. So the last section of this section of what firms are looking for is what no firm is looking for. Absolutely no firm. No firm is looking for someone who already knows everything. So take that in two ways. First of all, relieve some pressure from yourself. The firm that hired you knows that you are a law student. They are not expecting you to know everything or bring in tons of value even. They're providing an experience for you where you get to learn and show them your work ethic and how you interact with people. Those are the things that we've already covered today. They do not expect you to be a legal expert. Second way to take that is please don't be a know-it-all. If you act like a know-it-all when they are fully aware that you in fact do not know it all, you're going to be pegged as the intern who just thinks they're smarter than everyone else. And remember, you're a student first, so above all else, use this experience to learn from every encounter, absorb knowledge and experiences, be willing to think in different ways than you're used to. They are going to appreciate that mindset so much more than someone who's kind of a stick in the mud and just acts like they know everything. Be absorbent, be a sponge. If someone comes at you with a project that you have no idea what they're talking about, show some enthusiasm for learning, and they are really going to appreciate that mindset. All right, a note about time management. So I really believe when it comes to time management, in a lot of ways, you are in control of your own destiny. And if you don't have capacity for a project, you just gotta say so or offer an alternative. Since you're in control, you can go ahead and take control. So if someone brings you a project and you are kind of already in the weeds, then just say so and say, hey, I cannot get to that today. I could probably turn something into you next Wednesday. That's about where I'm at in my cycle of projects. And they may say, great, let me know, early next week what your week is shaping up to be. We'll figure it out. A lot of people were that flexible with me. And then occasionally they'll say, shoot, I need something this week. Let me go see if somebody else can help me. So don't feel afraid of that. A key to being in control is that you need to be organized. So time management is a lot of being able to quickly recognize what you have to do, when it needs to be done, and sort of your hierarchy of those priorities. So I love to keep a visual of each project that I'm working on. It works great because I can see the visual, and then also other people can see the visual. So what I did this summer is I had a separate file folder for every project that I was assigned. Now, there were a couple smaller projects that were just like, hey, can you edit this, or can you just read over this and make sure there aren't any typos? I had a couple projects like that, or little ones that I mostly was just doing on the computer and I didn't really have to have any hard documents for. But other than those, for every other project, I had a file folder with a pink sticky note on the front of it that said what the project was, who I was working with, and what the due date was on it. Now, I don't think anybody was reading my sticky notes, but everybody learned that my system was to have a file folder per sort of major project that I was working on. So if they walked into my office to say, hey, can you work on something for me? And they could see that I had 9 folders on my desk, they'd be like, ooh, you have some things going on. Maybe I'll come back. What's your status? It served as sort of a signal to other people when I was ready for more projects. I don't know if that's something that, applies across firms. I don't know, but it worked for me. And I think it also helped to show that I was able to multitask and that I was moving through different projects, even to people who weren't managing my workload. And to, every other attorney in the firm could see what I was working on, not in a way that I was broadcasting it, but if they took the time to look in my office, they could see it. It was great for me because I could visualize, okay, this is what I have going on, and then other people could also kind of take cues from that. Also, a note about time management is prioritize social events even when you have work to do. So the whole point is to get to know these people and for them to get to know you. And so even if you've got projects and you've got things going on, really try to attend the social events. And that means popping out to grab lunch, even if you have a project to work on. That means going to the social events that they plan for you. That means inviting other people to social events. Do you want to grab a drink after work? Do you want to go to lunch this week? I set up several lunches that were not orchestrated by the program, but I just wanted to get to know those attorneys. And so I reached out and I set up coffee and I set up lunch with those people, because that's what this is all about, is those connections, those interactions. Because even if I never work at this firm again, I have now built relationships and friendships and mentorships with these people that I had access to. So the whole point is to get to know them. So do that, even if you've got other projects going on. Another big thing about time management is communication. like I was mentioning before, explain to partners and associates that bring you projects what other projects you have going on and say, okay, I've got this that's due then, this that's due here. You can kind of walk them through your train of thought as you're thinking it through. And that gives them a really good baseline to know what you're working on and to say, okay, this is actually going to be a pretty heavy lift. So let me see if someone else is available, or let me check in with you next week and see, if you have a little bit more capacity then. That's a really great way to communicate, because then they can see that you want to do it. You're trying to make it work, but you're also having them help you to decide if that makes sense for this project. Also, you can use a mentor or someone that's running your program to get guidance on where you're at. I asked several times, even though I wasn't really ever feeling so overwhelmed, but I asked several times if my workload seemed appropriate. And the great thing about that is that it was a way to chat with my mentor. So I got more FaceTime with my, the mentor that I had and that was running my program. It also showed that I was being intentional about my time. So we talked earlier about everything you do sends a message. So asking a mentor and showing them, this is my stack of projects that I have. What do you think about this? Here's how I'm managing my time. That shows intentionality about your time, which is something that's really important in time management. It also shows respect for the work that I'm doing, that I'm not wanting to take shortcuts to be able to finish more projects. I'm really wanting to do a great job. All of this is sort of packaged up into this one simple question and conversation about how do you think my workload looks. So it allowed my program manager to facilitate my work a little bit better. It allowed her to really get an inside look into my process, which, for me is great because I get to showcase that one of my skills is time management. I'm good at this. I'm able to manage and multitask and do this. So it showed her sort of how I was doing that. Again, it sends a message. The last thing about communicating is that if you need more time, it's okay. There are some projects that they have hard deadlines on, and then some where they're like, I don't know, can you get me something by Tuesday? And it's not really a hard deadline for them. They don't have an external deadline about it. So if you need more time, let them know, but do it sooner rather than later. Because if you don't communicate and then all of a sudden it's an hour until you're supposed to turn something in, or even an hour past when you're supposed to turn something in, it's a little bit less respectable to ask for more time once you're already in the 11th hour. Does that make sense? Okay, last section that I have is actually doing the work. So yes, you are in charge of your own destiny, but you also have to dig in and get the work done. So whatever projects you take on, you'll need to put in the work. I generally was at work from about 8:30, 8:45 till about 6-ish, sometimes a little earlier, sometimes a little later. The latest I ever stayed was until 7:30, and that's because I was on a roll with a project. I really wanted to get it turned in, and it was totally my choice. I could have left and finished in the morning, but I was grooving. I had nothing to do after work, so I was like, let me just bunker down, figure this out, really kind of dive into it. So there are times that I stayed a little bit later, but there were also times that I, could leave at 5:15 because I was just kind of wrapped up on my projects and didn't want to start into something else that was new. So, as far as the day-to-day operation of being there, at least at the firm that I was at, I was pretty in control of my hours and I could work as much or as little as I wanted. I mean, I was definitely going to be there for at least 40 hours, but I would say I probably worked more like 45 or 50 hours just because I would say lunches almost every day were with someone. And so that was also kind of part of being on. And in addition, it was a 6-week internship. So I really had a limited amount of time to get across, the type of person that I am and my work ethic. And so I wanted to really make it clear that I would be a dedicated employee. I would work hard when I needed to. I would also have really healthy boundaries and I would, be responsible with my time. So there are also assignments where you might feel stumped. So go ask follow-up questions, even if you're not sure what questions to ask. Just initiate a conversation about the project, see if anything additional that they share leads you in a direction. And it's okay to be honest with them about feeling sort of stumped. Now, don't go in and just be like, I don't really know how to get started on this. I would shy away from going in to ask questions where it basically shows them that you haven't put a lot of thought into it and you want them to put thought into it. If you're going to go in and ask follow-up questions, have like a list of things that you've already tried. So when I was younger, my mom, bless her heart, I would lose something like a toy or my tennis shoes or whatever it was, right? Like children do this. And so I would come running to my mom, Mom, I can't find my tennis shoes, whatever it is, right? And she'd be like, well, where have you looked? And I would look at her like, well, don't you know where they are? Why do I have to go and look? And she's like, go look. Don't make me do your work for you. And so then, of course, I would go and I would find them in like 2 minutes. Not always, but she'd be like, well, where have you tried? Like, don't come to me as your first response. So similarly, don't go to the partner or the attorney as your first response, right? Have some things that you've tried. Think outside the box. Think creatively about this. Go ask someone else for tips, like, listen, where would you start with this? Do that, but don't go directly to the person that assigns you a project to ask for, what do I do? Right? Because you want to show some initiative and some know-how of, I can sort of grapple with a problem and come up with some ideas. Which leads me to the initial conversation that you have when you're receiving a project. Make sure that you have some baseline questions ready for them. So I had a structure whenever I received projects. I would always make sure to ask for a timeline, meaning when do you need this by? So, do you have a hard date? Is there like a soft date where we can maybe do a check-in? Something like that. I would get a timeline figured out for each project. And then I would ask about the scope. So how do you want me to turn in my work? Do you want a full memo? And if so, how long? And is there any structural request? Or do you want bullet points? Do you want paragraphs? How do you want this set up? What is your preferred method of receiving this information? And then how do you want me to submit everything to you? Some of them are like, just upload it to this, portal. Some of them want it in an email with an explanation in the body of the email. All of that. So kind of get an idea for what they're looking for. Also make sure to ask for a billing code. If you're tracking your time in a system, then you'll probably need that. That's kind of just something that you get to at the specific firm. But I always had a running list of questions that I needed to know the moment that I walked out of receiving a project. So then after those initial questions, I would have maybe between 3 and 5 questions that I really need to understand in order to know that I understand this project. So a really good one is, where would you start with this project? It feels kind of open-ended, but what you'll usually get from the attorney is that they'll launch into this great list of things that they would do first, and it gives you a great starting point. But try to avoid saying that in like a, how do you want me to do, like, how do I start? More of like a, what would you do? If you're taking your first stab at this, what would you do? And they know what you're asking, but the more you can orient that question to more like learning and more like, how would you approach this? Instead of like a, what do I do first? Then it sort of sends a different message, if you will. You can also go and ask other attorneys, and even ones that are not involved in the project or not even in that practice area. They likely all had internships and experiences, so they can draw on those experiences and help give you a little push in the right direction. I guess the big point that I'm getting to in all of this is, don't do it alone. You have lots of resources, many people who want to help you, so use them. All right, quick recap on what we have covered. There are some things that every firm wants, and that is turning in a great work product and paying attention to details. Please, for the love of God, don't misspell the client's name. The second thing that most firms are looking for, from what I can tell, is just someone they want to work with. It's someone that they feel like they would have a good time with, they want to pull long hours with, they feel like they can respect, all of those things. That's what most firms are looking for as far as I can tell. And then absolutely no firm is looking for someone who knows everything. Let's be honest, if you're in law school, you just simply don't, so don't act like you do. And then we talked about time management. Remember that you are in control of your destiny, and if you don't have capacity, say so, but also be in control of that destiny. So keep tabs on every project, know what you're working on, keep a running list, something visual perhaps for yourself and for other people in the firm to know what you're working on. Use your mentor, use someone else to like run your schedule by them and say, hey, is this a good amount of projects for me to be working on right now? Use that again to show what you're working on and how your work ethic is important to you. And communicate, don't forget to communicate. And then lastly, do the work. Do the work and do a really good job. If you get stumped, ask questions, follow up with people, use your other attorneys, use people around you. You are not alone. You can so do this. Okay, that is all that I have for you about being successful in a big law summer internship. The key is being yourself, putting your very best foot forward, and really showcasing what your strengths are, which you obviously have if you were able to go to law school, get through your first and possibly even your second year. I mean, you are already such an incredible person. So that's amazing. You're amazing. And thanks so much for listening. This has been Legaltini, your very own sip of law school.